Saiyan, Saiyan, Saiyan? Which is the correct pronunciation? This is something that several of you have asked me about in the comments. Well, it's time for me to finally answer the question. On this edition of Dragon Ball Dictionary, I'm going to be setting the record straight and telling you which pronunciation of SAIYAN you should use. Hey guys, before we get started, I just wanted to say that, look, I know that sometimes we can disagree about certain things in the Dragon Ball fandom, but there's something that we can all agree on. You should subscribe to this YouTube channel. Do it now. When it comes to SAIYAN, the English-speaking fandom is basically split into two factions. One of these factions believes that you should pronounce it Saiyan or some variation of that.
Everyone knows that SSJ is short for Super Saiyan.
And the other faction believes that you should pronounce it Saiyan or some variation of that.
There's a potential hint to the Saiyans or Saiyans in the dub. Well, you know what? It's Saiyans. I'm going to keep it with that.
Which of these two factions is correct and why do they disagree? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to dig into the origins of the word Saiyan or Saiyan. I'm probably going to be using both pronunciations, so get used to that. And yes, I'm aware that most of you already know the origins of the term Saiyan, Saiyan, but bear with me here because I think it's important that we all start on the same page and then we can go into the pronunciation side of things. Plus, you might learn something new. Of course, Saiyan comes from the Japanese term Saiyajin, and this is the made-up term that is used to refer to the warrior race that Vegeta and Goku and several other characters in the Dragon Ball universe belong to. Saiyajin is made up of two components. First there's Saya and then there's Jin. Saya comes from the Japanese word yasai. It's basically an anagram of that. Yasai means vegetable. And so all of the Saiyajin, Saiyan, Saiyan characters in Dragon Ball have names that come from vegetables. So you have Goku, his Saiyan name is Kakaroto or Kakarot. That comes from carrot. Vegeta is Vegeta in Japanese, but that's a pun on the English word vegetable, etc., etc. I know you know all this stuff. And then there's Jin. This is a suffix in Japanese. On its own, it basically just means person. But when used as a suffix, it functions as a way to indicate somebody's nationality or race, or in the case of science fiction, maybe their planet of origin. In English, we have multiple suffixes that do the exact same thing. For example, America, American, right? That indicates nationality. And that is why we get Saiyan, right? That at the end is the thing that indicates origin, race, nationality, and in this case, we're talking about the Saiyan race. By the way, and this is a bit of a tangent, but an interesting one, have you ever wondered why Toriyama decided to go with the whole vegetable naming convention for the Saiyajin? Well, thankfully, Toriyama talked about this in a 2004 interview. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically Toriyama said that naming a warrior race after meat just seemed too obvious, right? Like that was the thing that people would expect. So he wanted to kind of subvert those expectations. And instead of going with meat names, he decided to go with vegetable names. So basically, Toriyama's comedy instincts are the reason why we have characters named after carrots and cabbages and broccoli fighting to the death in Dragon Ball.
What's your name?
Broly.
Good point, Broly.
So if Toriyama would have chosen to go with the more obvious choice, according to him, of the meat naming convention, we might have ended up with Goku being named Tomahawk and Vegeta being named T-Bone. And, well, Dragon Ball would have been very, very different. Okay, so let's get back on topic. So the people that argue that Saiyan should be pronounced Saiyan or something along those lines basically point to the origins of this word in order to defend their position. Since the original word is Saiyajin, therefore the English word should be Saiyan or something like that. And this makes total sense, but it's not that simple. First of all, even the people that use the Saiyan pronunciation still are introducing some differences to the way the vowels are pronounced compared to the original Japanese. So then what would Saiyan sound like if you were to keep the vowels exactly the same as they are in Japanese? The answer is Saiyan.
Saiyan.
I know that sounds a bit weird because that is not how an English speaker would normally pronounce Saiyan. And this isn't criticism either because this is a completely normal thing. When you import a word into another language, almost always you're going to get some differences in the way it's pronounced. For example, in the case of Saiyan, That last ah sound in ya is extremely reduced by pretty much all speakers. Maybe there's some people that actually say yan, but I highly doubt it. All that being said though, Saiyan and its variations are definitely closer to the original Japanese than Saiyan. So does that mean that Saiyan is the correct pronunciation? Well, it all depends on what your definition of correct is. For example, if your definition of correct is the one used by most fans in the English-speaking fandom and the English dub of Dragon Ball Z, well, sorry, no, Saiyan is not the correct one.
Featured here in his Super Saiyan Blue form.
And that brings us to Saiyan. Why did we get this entirely different pronunciation when Saiyan is the one that is closer to the original Japanese? Well, of course, the short answer is Funimation. But there's a lot more to say about this because there is some logic to why we ended up with this other pronunciation. Obviously, I wasn't at Funimation when Dragon Ball Z was first being localized in the 90s, so I can't say for sure exactly why we ended up with Saiyan. However, as far as I can tell, it seems that one of two things probably happened. Either the localization team was thinking that they would go with Saiyan from the very beginning because they thought that was the easier and more approachable pronunciation for Americans, or two, maybe the localizers actually wanted to go with Saiyan, but then they showed that to the marketing people, or maybe they showed it to the voice cast, and then everybody was just pronouncing it as Saiyan, so they just decided, okay, I guess we'll go with Saiyan because apparently that is the pronunciation that Americans prefer. And by the way, when it comes to the AI letter sequence, A, as in Saiyan, is in fact the pronunciation that Americans prefer. I had ChatGPT generate multiple lists of 100 words that contain the AI letter sequence. And in about 90% of these words, the AI letter sequence was pronounced as A. For example, in words like pain, gain, rain. The other roughly 10% was composed of words like aisle and chair and stare and hair. So when you look at data like this, it becomes pretty clear that Americans have a preference for pronouncing the AI letter combination as A, and it makes total sense that an American without any background info or context might look at SAIYAN and assume that it's probably pronounced Saiyan. Another interesting thing worth pointing out is the case of the kaioken. In both the Ocean dub and the Funimation redub, it's pronounced kaioken.
Triple kaioken attack!
So it seems like the same exact thing happened here with the AI letter sequence, but at the very least, Funimation did change kaioken to kaioken in the Dragon Ball Z Kai dub.
3 times kaioken!
While we're here, I guess we should talk about the weird exception, Saibaman. So yeah, this term has the AI letter sequence, but unlike Saiyan and kaioken, this one is not pronounced saibaman, it's pronounced saibaman. Now I should point out that this isn't how it's pronounced in Japanese. In Japanese, it's pronounced saibaman. So there's two main differences here. First of all, that last man is always pronounced man. It doesn't matter if you're talking about more than one saibaman, it's always man. Second, Funimation dropped the second E after the ba, so instead of saibaman, we have saibaman or saibamen. As for why Funimation decided that saibamen was the best pronunciation to go with, well, I can't say for sure. I'm thinking there's a number of possible factors at play here. For example, saibamen has 3 distinct syllables, unlike Saiyan and kaioken. Also, you have to take into account the way the stress of these syllables might influence the way you pronounce that first syllable. And there's also the fact that saib, that B, is a stop consonant. And once again, this is different from what we see in Saiyan and in kaioken. Oh, and then there's Dragon Ball Daima. Thankfully, we're in modern times and localizers don't make weird changes like that anymore. But had Dragon Ball Daima been released like 20 or 25 years ago, you never know. We could have ended up with Dragon Ball Daima. But you know what? There's a pretty good chance that none of this would be a problem if the English spelling system actually made sense. But it doesn't. It's archaic, it's inefficient, and it's utter BS. And so we end up with all of this confusion because the AI letter sequence could be read a bunch of different ways. But here's something you might not know. While I was doing the research for this episode, I came across a single instance in which Vegeta says Saiyan in the Ocean dub. I'm not lying. This actually happens. Check this out.
Your father was an average fighter, Kakarot, but he was a brilliant scientist.
Goku's dad is a brilliant scientist. I bet you weren't expecting that one, huh? But all jokes aside, listen to scientist. Drop off that tist. Saiyan. He's actually saying Saiyan. I am saying Saiyan when I say scientist. It's the same pronunciation. So Saiyan is absolutely something that American English speakers say. For example, in words like cyanide, if you chop off that "ide," you end up with cyan. Or in the color cyan, that is the exact same thing as cyan.
Although scientifically it might be possible to create cyan, it's probably the hardest color to color match.
But again, because the English spelling system is ridiculous, we ended up with the mess we have. Okay, let's wrap this up. Saiyan or Saiyan, which is the correct pronunciation? Well, it all depends on how you look at it. In a way, they're both correct, and in a way, neither is correct. Here's the reality. Saiyan is not identical to the original Japanese, but it is the pronunciation closer to the original Japanese. However, it's used by a minority of fans. On the other hand, Saiyan is used by most of the English-speaking fandom. It's used by the official English dubs, the video games, and I don't think that that will ever change. Should Funimation have gone with Saiyan back in 1996? Yeah, I think they should have. But the ship has sailed on that. It's been a very, very long time now that we've been using Saiyan in the English-speaking fandom, and it seems highly unlikely that Saiyan will ever take over as the official English pronunciation of Saiyan. Although I did come up with a scenario that could potentially result in Saiyan becoming the most commonly used pronunciation. Let's just say that in the future there's a new Dragon Ball anime or movie that comes out that explains that the origin of the Saiyajin's name is a location called Saya. If that were to happen, the localizers of this English dub of this anime or movie would have three options. Number one, the name of the location would be called Saya, but they would retain the Saiyan pronunciation. Number two, the name of the location would be changed to Seiya, and they would retain the Saiyan pronunciation. Number three, the name of the location would be kept as Saya, but Saiyan would be changed to Saiyan. Whatever they choose, though, there's going to be a bunch of Dragon Ball fans that are going to be very, very upset, so I do not envy them at all. But if this were to happen, I'll probably make a video about it. Anyway, this is all to say that both Saiyan and Saiyan are valid pronunciations, so just pick the one that you prefer. But, as I always say, whichever one you pick, just don't be an asshole about it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know, are you Team Saiyan or are you Team Saiyan? I want to know. Drop me a comment. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're going to enjoy my Dragon Ball Dictionary series. So check out the playlist on screen right now. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.